So this afternoon session happens sporadically, called Mountains and Rivers. This is an opportunity for students of meditation to temple residents or others who come in to ask questions based on their practice or based on anything that's coming up for them in their life, whatever that may be. And please feel free to ask questions, and I'll respond as best I can. If you have no questions, I'll go and take a nap. Yes?
Is there always something underneath a projection? Are we always projecting onto something?
By being defensive, you mean? Or?
I just mean when we talk about projections, are there ever projections that are particularly onto something? Or is it always something arises and we add?
It seems, yeah, it seems that even the slightest movement of the mind is a projection. So, but it's not, again, as I've said so many times, it's not about getting rid of the projection or the negative feeling about a given situation, or positive feeling for that matter. It is about including that in the awareness, so that the awareness, you could say it, to use a metaphor, it's so that the metaphor, or so that the awareness is more like what the sky does. The sky is just there. It just includes clouds. If you were to ask the sky, it wouldn't care whether there are clouds or not. So when the mind is more like a sky, when we say that, we're not trying to make the mind into something else. We're changing the awareness, which is completely movable. You can move the awareness. It's just amazing what the awareness is able to do. You can move the awareness to the attention of watching thought patterns. You can move the awareness to watching thought patterns about the thought patterns and emotions. You can move it to projections, ideas, birds outside, making noise outside the temple. It is completely without any limitation. In the Heart Sutra, this is when the liberation occurs, this is called Mukkegeko, without walls of the mind. That's why I say awareness doesn't belong to anyone. If you see there's no self, there's no ownership of anything. As long as there's a self grasping at something and rejecting something else, or there's going to be some kind of warfare, some kind of skirmishes going on all the time. Go ahead.
Is there something beneath the projections? Is it always projected onto something?
It looks like that. So, but if you were to look deeply, you would see that it's even what is being projected on is also something that's part of the whole makeup of cause and effect. But it's extensive. So it's by saying it's extensive, it means that whatever you're projecting onto that situation, what you're doing is you're adding a little patina. Something arises, and you're putting a little coating of projection on it, and whatever's arising is dependently arisen. So the dependent origination is that started in beginningless time is arising as something. It might be something personal, might be a car honking down the road, it might be the actual car, which comes out of, look at how complicated it is. Look at how we've ever built anything, like put anything together that's big and complicated. It always starts with just a couple simple little things. And so this is the way karma is working. It's been going on for, well, even say centuries is an understatement. So whatever's arising is coming out of the causes and conditions we call karma, or the 10,000 things. And so the way we work with that as meditators is to what? The attitude is to include. The attitude is to be aware. The attitude is to not accept it, passion, not reject it, aggression, and not shut down, distract yourself, look away, or abandon, which is ignorance, the three poisons of passion, aggression, and ignorance. More.
You said that what we project onto is still part of the cause and effect matrix.
Yes.
So is what is projected onto any more or less valid than the projection itself?
It was very similar. you're just buying into the whole cause and effect, and it's called, Trungpa Rinpoche called it materialism, various kinds of materialism, scientific materialism, spiritual materialism, material materialism, being hooked on stuff, on its relative value or its activity, coming, going, coming, going. More. Yes, sir.
In Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, Trungpa talks about how there's no separation, no distinction between things. But then he also talks about when you become aware, you understand the space between things. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
I think that there's a transition that happens when one begins a sitting practice of meditation, where we start to not only see the things, we see the interval between things. So the beginning of understanding space, or the fancy Sanskrit word for that is vipassana. The vipassana is to begin to see the spaciousness of between things and around things, around the thought patterns. When we observe thought patterns, we see how much incredible space there is around our thoughts. So the clinging to the thought, the grasping to the thought, is lessened because of the spaciousness that's there. And then there's what is called Mahavipassana, or the great awareness, the great expanse, which is actually doesn't even have any objects in it. It's without any separation at all. The space and the objects are no longer two different things. That takes a while. When I say it takes a while, it takes strong practice. There's lots of levels and layers of individual confusion that need to be, you could say, gone through or sunk down into or explored or looked at, or whatever word would fit. More?
Is spaciousness a quality of basic goodness?
Yeah, it's not separate from basic goodness. Basic goodness is just a relative way of saying there's nothing wrong with anything. It's called, in the Dzogchen tradition of Longchenpa, it's called the great perfection, the great perfect nature of everything. Fundamentally, everything is perfect. And just a relative way of saying, just don't separate yourself from anything from now on. And how do you do that? See the way you keep separating. In order to not separate yourself from anything, you have to actually witness the separation without accepting it, without rejecting it, and without shutting down. And that's, what do you call that? Tall order.
Quite some time ago, you were talking about digging ruts in trenches, like maybe a few years ago.
Yeah.
Can you ever dig a rut with your practice? Can it ever become rut-like?
Yeah, it's a good idea to dig a rut with your practice. Because what you're doing is you're endeavoring to repeat. You come back, sit down, come back and sit down, come back and sit down. The Han and the bell sound 3 times a day. Scheduled sitting happens. We come in, we bring ourselves back to this very simple situation of just observing over and over and over again. And so I wouldn't really worry about the rut quality. The way the rut thing shows up is in a kind of fundamentalism. Occasionally, that people who spend a lot of time trying to understand this, they get kind of tired of trying to understand, because it costs too much. They have to give up some kind of offering, and which is, of course, the crazy self, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to give up our ego. So therefore, we might lock down on something that actually gives the ego a little hideout, protects it.
How do we work with that? If we feel like we're starting to hide out, or
so if you know that, then that's awareness, and so you just watch that and watch how it operates. Spend a lot of time watching it rather than time jumping to conclusions about it and getting too materialistic about it. Like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to stop this. Spiritual materialism. trying to use spiritual techniques to get somewhere. So the ego can be very shiny and show off as a wonderful spiritual being.
If this shows up as sitting less, should there be some form of trying to fix that?
So,
if I find excuses to not sit, and I know it's an excuse, I'm making an excuse not to sit. At what point do you kind of step in and say, enough, I'm just going to go sit?
So it's a good way of putting it, and it would depend. It's different for everyone. That's why we created this temple monastery, so that you have a really strong container for practicing. Very hard to do this in your kitchen, or your bedroom, or your closet, or your backyard. You can, but it's very hard to repeat it. And so that's why we have this excuse me, situation. So it's the idea of coming back and just repeating it. And if you find yourself in your situation, since you're the Eno here, you live here, and you're not only a temple resident, you're also a monk. And so with your situation, it's probably going to be a little different, because your whole life is about this practice rather than just part of your life. So it's different for you. You may find yourself backing off. Anybody might. Sometimes you just find yourself, you're sitting really good every day for week after week, month after month, and then you just stop sitting. And it could be triggered by some family situation, something, like a death in the family or something like that, just takes you out of your rut. And so then you have to come back and realign yourself with it. Interesting.
When you said realign yourself with it, what does that look like, to realign yourself with your practice?
That's what the forms are. Come in, do the sutras. Sutras are very boring. We have to do them a few hundred times before they get boring, but until that time, they're just kind of irritating. But then they start to get kind of like, why even do this? When you're getting to the point of why even do this, that's when the sutras are doing what they need to do, which is working with your conceptual mind that grasps at things and refuses to see emptiness. Emptiness arises in the form of boredom or irritation. You're welcome. Bailey.
How does emptiness arise in boredom?
So we're doing something and we start to become bored because it's no longer entertaining. So as meditators, we just stay here and just continue to be bored. And we'll notice that nothing lasts. The boredom itself starts to turn into something. The boredom can even, as I think I said not too long ago, even the boredom is interesting or entertaining. If you just keep looking at it and see, what is boredom? Find out for yourself, what is it that actually, when we start to get just kind of worn out looking at something or doing something. So the emptiness part comes from it being, having a quality in the mind of the self-centeredness in the thinking process of being meaningless. This isn't getting anywhere. This is meaningless. That kind of thing. That's the ego's commentary on emptiness. The wisdom mind, prajna, your Buddha nature, will make no comment. It won't like, it won't dislike. And this doesn't mean that you won't have emotions that come and go about anything. You start listening to Mozart, or you start eating strawberry shortcake. You're going to have some kind of feelings, emotions about that. But it does not happen to a self. It happens to your sensorium. And it's without a self. So you can enjoy things without having an enjoyer. The enjoyment is completely that. It's not separate from it. This is the amazing thing about consciousness. Is anything that arises in apparent space is available to your consciousness, and you can just completely enjoy anything that's happening. It's called the first bhumi. No self. No solid being in the skandhas. And it's a discovery that each person, if they are on this path, needs to make for themselves. It's not something to believe in. We, as Buddhists, we don't particularly believe or disbelieve anything. Everything is doing exactly what it needs to do. More?
Is consciousness universal?
So those are two concepts. Consciousness is a concept that points to something that we can't really find the front and back door to it. We know it's there, but we don't understand exactly what it is phenomenologically, as in some kind of ontological or thing principle. You can't find it. So, but it is something. But so then when you say, is it universal? Then I would say, well, there's another concept. So does that mean universe? So I'd say, yeah.
Okay. Well, do you think that it's everywhere, just a matter of degree?
So is there an everywhere? Really? I mean, this is just simple existential approach. Is there a that? So from the point of view of realization, there is no separation. And to realize that is you're all through looking for anything else. Everything is always completely at your doorstep, is available to you all the time. It's approachable, it's receivable, and it's available as the path and as the practice, and it's completely not separate as fruition. As fruition, you may go back in, but there's no difference between anything because fruition is not separate. So therefore, you can't find something else other than yourself.
When Chogyam Trungpa says
Yes.
That form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and then he rounds it out to say that form is form, emptiness is emptiness.
Yes.
How are we supposed to understand that?
It's just not two. When you say emptiness or you say form, very simply, is empty. So it's empty of what we project onto it. So it's empty. And then if we say that, then we start to get kind of excited about that because we start to see, yeah, everything is empty of anything about it. But that's also a form. So, and that's also a setup for the other way around. Form is also, emptiness is also form. So we actually created something else. And form and emptiness are not two different things. Trying to do it with concepts is difficult. It seems that it has to be realized on the cushion or sitting practice, continually stretching that awareness so that when you get up off the cushion and you go into your everyday life, you begin to see form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The same is true of feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness.
And then to say form is form, emptiness is emptiness. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? It sounds like a riddle.
Form. There's form.
Well, we know it's form just by saying it's form. Why does he have to say form is form and emptiness is emptiness?
He doesn't have to say that. It's because he's so generous, he's saying that. Again, it's not separate. It actually transcends our thoughts about it. So you can march up to the edge with your thoughts, but at some point, something needs to be, you could say, in the relative situation, something needs to be surrendered. And what is surrendering in this situation is our need to actually hook into something as some kind of solid thing, turn something that is completely not separate into a separate thing. So this is why the sitting practice of meditation is so powerful, because it slowly wears away at that tendency to materialize everything and solidify everything. There's the book, the translation by Red Pine, Bill Porter, of the Heart Sutra. Would be a good, if you haven't read that already, that would be a good one. His commentary is good. We've actually studied that a couple different times here.
We actually haven't since Burley and Brandon.
It's been that long ago.
Yeah.
So that would be a good one to go back into that. And also the Diamond Sutra would be another good one that sets up that alternative facts. Wait a minute. Alternative emptiness.
When Trungpa talks about bringing nirvana into samsara.
Yeah.
What does he mean by that?
It's not separate from it. So you actually see, it's the same thing as basic goodness. You actually see that your very life, the very thing that is difficult or challenging or bumpy or abrasive is nirvana, not separate from nirvana. It has to be realized. It's not information you imbibe. It is something you realize, you see it. It's not an experience. If it's an experience, then it can leave. Experiences come and then they go. But realization, you just realize, and I like to say, you're grandmothered in, grandfathered in. You realize it all the way back to beginningless time. You're suddenly a being with no separation from anything. Everywhere you look, it's your body. This is your body, not just this. That's why it doesn't make any difference, particularly whether this lives or dies. Transcend that. It doesn't mean you're going to eat rat poison or something to prove a point. You aren't about to show off about it. You're just no longer threatened by anything. Which also doesn't mean that you won't, if you need like open heart surgery, which I had, or you would go and have it done, especially if somebody wanted you to. Yes.
How do we work with the expectations of others or the projected expectation of others?
Softly.
What do you mean?
I just mean don't do much with it. Let it be its own situation. If someone is with you and is having expectations about you or about their life or whatever, just don't add to the confusion with more turmoil of trying to stop it, trying to manipulate it, if you can. And if you need to do something, then pacify it. That would be the pacify, just pacify. More?
I just have trouble not being influenced by my own expectations of how I should function, or my perceived expectations of how others are expecting me to function. I find that very influential in what I do and difficult to work with. So I'm trying to wonder how to work with that without getting rid of it, but also not just succumbing to that energy.
Well, it sounds like you're doing it. You're just describing how it feels to do that. So, but what it also sounds like you're doing that, but you think there's something else. You're doing that, but you think, well, I'm doing this, but why does it keep happening? Aren't I working with this in a skillful way, so it'll diminish? Perhaps not. But it sounds like you're already your awareness is working with that kind of a dynamic already. So I wouldn't add anything to it, including a conclusion. It seems to be necessary to have a willingness to work with whatever arises, no matter how threatening it is, no matter how much of an indictment of our own life or person or it's happening. Just everything should be on receive. That's the most misunderstood part of generosity, is to be able to receive what the world is presenting to you rather than constantly objecting or trying to make something else happen.
Do you still have expectations that arise for you?
Yes.
How do you work with those?
I don't do much. I don't know if I do work with them. I complain to Unyo. So it's not about being somebody else. It's about being completely, totally who you are with no apologies at all about anything. Actually live your life. Be your karma, which doesn't mean rob banks, which doesn't mean take advantage of people's ignorance or lack of understanding. take advantage of anyone. Just whatever's arising, that's what needs to arise. How do you know? Because it's arising. But what might arise, also what might arise with you, is you reaching out and pushing on it. That's also arising. And that, if that's happening just in the context of what is arising, then there's no one behind that who's pushing. It's called, in Tibetan Buddhism, it's called crazy wisdom, because it looks like there's a self there. It looks like somebody has an agenda about something, but maybe not.
There feels like a natural tendency to put love above, to elevate love above other things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just like a hippy-dippy dualism type of thinking, or is there something about love that...
It could be. I mean, that's something that's it's kind of hard to give a talk about love. I've done that a few times, by request and also by circumstance. But I think the kind of love that we're talking about on the spiritual path it's not something you do, it's something you are. So it's not something you do to someone else. It's something you might love somebody or tell somebody that you love them. I'm not saying you wouldn't do that you would refrain from that, but the actual situation is you're completely open and I wouldn't even say accepting. You're not, if you're going to say anything, it might be through via negativa. You might say not objecting to anything. You're not going to object to the back of your hand, which is not, you're not separate, and you're not separate from anything or anyone. It makes it challenging if there's still some kind of shreds of ego or self-centeredness hanging around. They get very nervous when you start accepting things that they don't particularly care for and don't support their individuality and their sparkling abilities.
You talked about via negativa.
Yes.
And it seems like Buddhism is all via negativa. Is there any affirmation going on?
Yes, I love you. That's an affirmation.
Love you too.
Yeah. Thanks. So it's but the negative part, all it's doing is by negativity. It's a way of expressing it, because if we express it positively, then the self-centeredness kind of resonates with that and hears that and it thinks it's included. And it's not that it's excluded. It's not necessarily included. You don't have to include something that's unreal. It'll find its own track, and so it doesn't get shut down on or pushed away as something it shouldn't be because it's unreal. So it's included, but it's through the negative way of looking at it. It's like saying life is suffering. People will say, well, Buddhism's such a negative spiritual path. Well, find me a Buddhist who is, if you're hang around them, that is particularly negative. You might find other people that are way more negative. Most people who practice the teachings of the Buddha are pretty easygoing people. Yes.
Yeah. Even so, even having Buddhist principles in mind, I still, when I observe what my train of thought is,
yes,
it seems to always be in some way related to me.
Yeah.
Something I've done, someone I've talked to, something involving
What's
me.
your question about that?
Okay. I know that's such an inconsequential part of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Just me. It's not even there. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But how can I feel like how can I become more other-oriented or world-oriented in my thinking? Like, why am I spending time thinking about what I have done or haven't done when I could be thinking about feeding hungry people or something like that?
I understand.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't feed hungry people. I often say, but don't take your unexamined confusion out into the world of hungry people, and because you're going to run into really big difficulty out there. I would say first train your mind, find out, as sometimes been said, if you don't really, haven't inspected or looked at or worked with or softened this negativity that's in your own heart, when you go out into the world, then the world will start to trigger that uninspected negativity, and you will tend to, and this is not an accusation or anything, but you'll tend to project that negativity onto others rather than see that it's your own. Not that they don't have some too, but then you'll add your unexamined negativity onto them, and then we're looking at probably some kind of skirmish or warfare. Whereas if you make peace with this here now, so that there's no longer no longer anyone to fight with here, no longer a being that you object to or you agree with, or you do anything with, then you've made peace. There's nothing to do, nothing left to do with your life. Therefore, you can do whatever comes up. You have no agenda about anything particular. It may look like you're, if you're in a temple, in a monastery, and you're a monk, it may look like you have an agenda. But that probably is a projection of others. And there may be some truth to it, but mainly it's clarify this so that you don't take the unclarified mind out into the world, and with all good intention. It's because there's so much confusion and chaos going on in the world that is disguised as sanity. It's just, if you look at it even a little bit, it's even the most people who seem to be very sane, are really operating out of an unexamined mind. There's still warfare going on with them, even though they might be smiling.
Even if my thoughts about myself are neutral?
Doesn't matter.
They're still there, yeah.
Thoughts are thoughts are thoughts, and they won't be neutral long if you go out into south side of Chicago trying to feed somebody. Yeah, it'd be better to have a big organization that you can, stay back in the stage left. So, and not that you couldn't do that. I wouldn't take away someone who is motivated to do that. I would say, then trust yourself, do what you need to do. I don't know what's happening with your karma, but it just seems that it's really important to find out who you are before you. So you're clear about this. I'm not saying there's some kind of discovery. I finally know who I am. I don't mean that. I mean, clarify this so that you can see that even the confusion here is no longer a threat to you. Because if your own confusion is a threat, you'll tend to, as people do, tend to cover that up and then be distracted by other things in life. In here, it's harder to do that because you're always sitting down and uncovering. When you look at the wall, you continue to uncover what's happening in the mind, which is a good idea. Bailey?
In working with my paranoia, you suggested I might need to go into the paranoia?
Yes.
How would I do that?
I think there's, for one thing, practice a lot, sit a lot, which you already do quite a bit of that. But you could actually, you could use some kind of very specific way of working with it, like writing down some thoughts about it on an index card and put it in front of you and do it in the sitting situation. Actually break it up, sit for an hour and a half or so on, and then after you've sat for a while, then just go right into the concept around the emotion and try to see what that is fundamentally, what the mechanics of that are, not by analyzing it, but by taking the awareness into it. When you take the awareness into something without analyzing, you don't know what it is. You know you're there, but you don't know what it is. If you start to know what it is, then we're getting back into psychology and philosophy, and we're going back into the mundane path, which is not incorrect. It's just not the spiritual path that transcends this world.
Is bringing, writing it down and looking at it, contemplating it, is bringing my awareness to that situation any different than bringing my awareness to the paranoia when it's actually arising spontaneously?
I think a little of each. I think when it's rising spontaneously, if you're doing a lot of sitting, you're more able to do that. And if you're using concepts, so you're actually saying, this freaks me out, might be one word, this person, or this situation, or whatever it may be. And it would be, it'd be different if anyone else were to do something like this. It would be your own, I wouldn't say you should do this or that. It would be your own understanding of what that is. Only you know what your own triggers are. So I would find the trigger, contemplate the trigger, and see that it's just a trigger. And then that will show you the difference between the trigger and what is being triggered, because that's the duality that we're fixated on. When we see that none of that is separate, then there's a possibility for some the fixity or the grasping or the tightness starts to become lubricated. We start to open up more, and things are more flow, there's less blockages. By actually looking at them without fixing them, without abandoning them, and without fighting with them or chopping them up or trying to get rid of them. And so, just to add on to that a little bit, it's if you're really doing this with your awareness, and there's a great deal of energy and sincerity going into this, then out of that awareness, you might find yourself chopping things up. You might find yourself, because the awareness is really powerful, and because you're completely present with whatever negativity is arising, you might find yourself operating in a way that that may, even at the time, may seem manipulative. It may seem warlike, but since it's coming out of the awareness, this is when it's actually functioning without a self. You won't know if your thought patterns, your emotions are operating without a self or not. If you do, if you feel like you're operating without a self, then you are probably incorrect. Do you follow me a little bit what I'm saying? I'm saying, so there's no like, oh, this needs to look this way. When you go into it, it may look like some other situation, and I would say just trust yourself. Less is better. If it looks very simple, and if it looks kind of confusing, probably that's because the awareness is not turning what is being seen into something else. It's not saying this means that, or this means that. Not abandoning what is arising in any of the sense fields.
Is there a kind of fixation that's happening when there's lots of vacillation also happening?
Yeah, I follow you. I think that kind of fixation is coming out of fear. Going this way and going that, and a kind of a fearfulness that's happening. And so that then in turn is coming out of a sense of self that feels threatened. So the fixation there is not the vacillation, it's the fixation on a self, which is stationary. The fixation is stationary. The fear is going back and forth. It's like you're in the woods and there are eyes looking out of the woods at you. Scary. Like that. You follow me a little bit? So it's not, the going back and forth is a way of avoiding looking at one situation. So I would say that kind of situation is more of an avoidance or ignoring, a way of ignoring. You look at it and then you leave it, and you look at that and then you leave that, and then you look at that and you leave that. Sitting practice and meditation actually, in any, depending on what you're working with, will allow you to actually see what is there. You'll actually look at what is there rather than abandon it for something else or vacillate. Yes.
When my fear of death presents itself, it does so with such intensity that I feel totally inconsolable. And I feel like any attempt to make myself feel better about it is delusion. How do I get beyond that?
You know what this is? Get a flat butt, sit on the cushion, look and look and look and look and observe what arises and falls, so that when you're off the cushion or you're feeding the chickens or whatever you're doing, and that kind of fear comes up, triggered by whatever, the time of the day, the phase of the moon, the interaction with the neighbors or with your parents or whatever is happening, whatever happens to be kind of a trigger-like device that brings that up, that what it runs into when that fear comes up, it runs into a very, very open dimension, a very open space, because the awareness is like an invisible muscle. It's like the sky. It's invisible. You can't really see the sky. You only know there's a sky when you see clouds, just like you only know there's awareness when you see thoughts. Without thoughts, what's there? Actually, that is that which does not come or go. If it doesn't come, it can't go. The sky doesn't come and go. The clouds come and go. It's just like fear comes and goes. But the sky is, it's not even saying so what. Well, maybe in some parts of the country, the sky might say so what. Like Alaska, where the air is really cold. So it seems to be it's always about awareness. And what is awareness doing? It's watching what moves until nothing's moving.
If awareness is watching, but I thought awareness was to kill the watcher.
Who told you that?
That's paraphrasing from
Somebody.
From Chogyam Trungpa. You know, to get rid of the watcher. Well, like you said, you get rid of the enjoyer, and there's just enjoyment. And
you don't get rid of the enjoyer. Go ahead.
I thought you said something earlier in this talk about that. There is
I doubt
enjoyment,
that.
but there is no one there to.
But I didn't say you get rid of it.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Don't apologize. I don't think I ever say get rid of anything, do I? Have I ever said that? Other than get rid of, let's see.
Get rid of that cat.
Yeah. Get rid of Yahtzee?
Yeah.
No, Yahtzee's a nice cat.
He was a nice cat.
Well, he still is. Yahtzee's right here.
Flamboyantly amazing.
Yeah. So the idea is to see that the enjoyer, the identity quality of it is unreal. And that way the enjoyment is then liberated. Then it's enjoyable, or it may come, it may go. We're not grasping at it. So, more. Yeah. Question?
You said that of the three poisons, ignorance is the most difficult, just by its nature.
Mm-hmm.
How can we use the teacher to help us see our own ignorance?
You're doing it.
Also,
Just, we're here, I'm talking, you're listening, you're asking questions about the nature of your mind, the nature of working with awareness. I'm doing my best to respond in a way that doesn't make things more confusing for you, but encourages you to continue to look, because you have to do it yourself. It is a transcendental do-it-yourself project. You have to awaken yourself. My teachers couldn't awaken me, even though I think they tried. So I cannot awaken you. On the other hand, to be around someone who has understanding of this and is helping you, is insisting that you can do this, telling you you can do this yourself, you can awaken yourself. And I highly recommend you do that before you pass into the next life or pass beyond this one. Find out who you are fundamentally. So that's why we have the study groups. That's why we have the scheduled sitting. That's why we do all the forums that we do. So for those few people, a dozen or 18, 20 people maybe, sometimes as many as 25 people in a city of hundreds of thousands of people. There's only a few people that really want to do this, not very many. Most people are tied up in their materialism of some kind or another.
So, since ignorance seems to be, I would call invisible, are there other than just flat out having a teacher say, here's what you're ignoring, how can we see our own ignorance?
Why don't you paraphrase that question?
Well, I think you've said that you can't do this for us.
Yes.
But as a Dharma teacher, do you see our ignorance?
Sometimes a little bit.
So why don't you just tell us?
Stop being ignorant. How'd that work? I do a little bit with people. It depends on how someone presents themselves. Some people are not ready. Some people are just not ready, even though I find with some people they need to hear this. They need to hear this or need to hear that. So I tend to function differently with different people. How does that show up for you? You're my wife. You live with me.
It seems pretty transparent, I guess.
Okay.
It's just easy to get into the this and that of everyday life.
It is.
Is that ignoring?
Not if you're aware of it. So it's not about avoiding or not about getting away from something. It's about more space, more aware of what this is. This is why it's called the great perfection, because everything is included. The anger, the passion, the aggression, the ignorance, everything is transmuted. Everything is transformed into crazy wisdom. Being crazy because from the point of view of ego, it looks nuts. It looks crazy to actually function without reference point. And as someone who has received the bodhisattva vow or the vow to be with all things, you're no longer separate from anything. So therefore, however you function is always favorable, you could say, to all things. You're always in support of everything. This doesn't mean you don't put out a forest fire. In that way, you're in support of trees continuing to live.
So does the idea of right action or beneficial action begin to maybe subside in terms of something's better than another?
You mean, does that subside? I think it softens up so that the division between things is more foggy or froggy. It's like it's been said that the boundary between sitting meditation and post-meditation starts to go away, so that you're always, it's not that you're always meditating like a credential, like I'm always meditating. I'm always meditating. It's not like that. It's like that you're never ignoring anything. You've actually what happens on the cushion over years and years of practicing, eventually when you get up and that's almost like a ghost following you. You can't, as Suzuki Roshi once said, if someone's watching you, you can hide from them. But if no one is watching you, you can't hide from yourself. You can't escape this incredible awareness that you're not separate from. So it's you're being tracked all the time in terms of kind of some kind of separation. But in terms of not separate, there's nothing tracking anything. There's nothing to accomplish, there's nothing to do, and it's called realization. As Coben said, falling apart, falling apart. The self-centeredness is falling apart, collapsing in terms of you're seeing that it's unreal. That's what's happening. You're no longer trying to keep yourself glued together with your opinions, your ideas, your judgments, or take yourself apart by means of other people's negativity about you, or defending that, or you're no longer doing anything with it. You might feel like crap, you might feel good. You're not differentiating between the two, or saying that when you feel bad, that must mean, or when you feel good, that must mean. You don't abandon anything that's arising. It's not two. It's like, why would you abandon the daytime? Why would you abandon the nighttime? They're not two. Two words for the same thing. Any further questions? Thank you so much. So I don't know